Hi everybody, this is Truth Seeker here. Um, just wanted to make a video on a couple of things that have occurred lately with me and just throw them out there. Recently, I had an exchange of emails with a cousin of mine. Um, this particular cousin, he's about 6 years older than me. He's one of the more prominent uh, Bible students in the United States. He's known around the world in Bible student circles, uh, especially for his chronological studies. He's very interested in biblical chronology, and he's considered a sort of an expert in that area from a Bible student perspective. And he's even held seminars on this topic. I had mentioned to him a couple years ago that I was an atheist, and we basically have not discussed much in that area. We don't really talk to each other much. We never really have had much contact with each other over the years. Um, he's moved in his own circles, and when I left the Bible students, we really basically didn't dialogue really at all, even very much before I left the Bible students. But over the last couple of years, we had some exchanges of emails, and I had mentioned to him that I was no longer a Bible student, that I was an atheist. And part of the reason for that was that he was a very formal individual, and he was calling me brother. And I just didn't feel comfortable with that. And so I had mentioned that I was an atheist, and I no longer believed in what the Bible students believe in. I didn't consider myself a Bible student any longer. Well, I was a little surprised when I received an email early in August. The Bible students held their general convention from July 20th to 25th, and very shortly after that convention was completed, I received several emails from my cousin. One of them had a link to Dennis Prager video oh on arguments for a creator. It was an argument, a cosmological argument about how the universe could required a creator. So anyway, I decided to address that whole issue and just kind of lay it all out there and finalize this. I just don't want to have any more future discussions on the matter. And I did a brain dump basically, and I responded with an 18-page paper that I threw together real fast. In fact, it really needed a lot of work. There were a lot of typos in it, but it was basically a brain dump of most of the key arguments that compelled me to those things that I considered when looking at my faith and evaluating as to whether or not it made sense. And I thought these were pretty compelling arguments, at least they were to me. And so I laid them out to him, and one of the statements that was made in this PragerU, which is not a university by any means, this PragerU video had to do with making an assertion that it was compulsory for atheists to prove their position, and that's entirely wrong. Anybody who's knowledgeable of Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra would see that it is not compulsory upon atheists to prove their position, because basically it's a non-position. It's the stance that the evidence for God is not sufficient to make the claim or assertion that a God exists. And my cousin, when I made that point and argued that point, made an outward gesture, I guess, or a concession to that particular point. Whether or not it was, whether or not he really believed in it, he did concede that it isn't contingent upon atheists. It's contingent upon those that are making the positive assertion that God does exist. And then he went ahead and started using the Bible as a means of proving the existence of God. Well, that's not the. You need something. I could write anything and say that I am the grand poobah of some planet of in a distant galaxy somewhere, and you have to believe it by faith. No, I have to offer evidence to show that that's indeed true. I'm making an assertion, and I have to provide sufficient evidence to you in order to make that assertion seem reasonable. Not only seem reasonable, but accepted as a reasonable proposition. And if you reject my evidence, that's basically the null hypothesis. And basically that's what atheism is. It's the rejection of that evidence as being sufficient. And so we have been going kind of back and forth on this, and I guess the tennis ball's in my court at this point, and I don't know whether or not I really need to go any further, because basically evolution itself, just the fact that evolution is true. I recommended to him Jerry Coyne's book, Why Evolution is True. It's a great book in layman's terms about evolution, how it works, and why it is true, and how it's been proven to be true, all the evidence for it. And so basically I really don't need to go into the Bible and show its inconsistencies and try to argue from that point of view, because in reality the entire faith of the Bible students is founded or based on this concept that all people came from one pair, Adam and Eve, and that sin had passed down to all humans from that original pair, and that Jesus, by offering himself as a sacrifice, ransomed Adam and Eve and redeemed them from the sentence of death that was imposed on them for their disobedience. Now, evolution, the fact of evolution, completely nullifies any such belief, any such assertion that the human race came from a single pair and was redeemed. Because who is Adam? I mean, the humanity, Homo sapiens, derived 150,000 to 300,000 years ago from Homo erectus, and earlier hominid species. And we know this for a fact because we have the evidence that supports that. And that fact, that evidence, that support just completely nullifies the biblical assertion that Adam and Eve, that whole story of Adam and Eve. And if I seemed distracted there for a second, it was because my wife came by, and I don't know if she wanted my attention. Anyway, there have been some interesting things that have been going on in the world of the Watchtower. If you've been following Lloyd Evans' videos, and in particular the In Focus series, try to straighten out my hat a little bit. Yeah, so if you've followed the Lloyd Evans In Focus, there have been some legal developments of late that may have dire consequences to the Watchtower organization, and hopefully it will have an impact on the Watchtower, either to make reforms regarding their policy, or at least bankrupt them to the point where they are marginalized as an organization. To tell you the truth, I very seriously doubt that the Watchtower will concede. They are steadfast, staunch believers in their interpretation of the Old Testament and the Bible, the basis for this two-witness rule that they claim is necessary in order for someone to, if whether or not somebody's allegations of abuse, sexual abuse against them, they won't accept that unless there've been two witnesses to the act, and that's extremely unlikely. I mean, these, it's like I said to our neighborhood when my neighbor decided, we have a new neighbor, decided to put his home up on an online B&B advertisement, and I asked the question, who's screening these people? You know, we have small children in the neighborhood, and who's sex offenders don't go around wearing a T-shirt saying I am a pedophile. So these guys do this type of thing in a way, in a manner that they won't get caught, and so it turns out to be the word of the victim against the word of the perpetrator. And this is something that really needs to be handled by trained individuals, people who have a great deal of training and expertise in the area of being able to tell deception, lies, needs to be handled by authorities. And these individuals, the Watchtower's organization is not one that is really in a position to make these types of judgments, to judge these things internally with their elders, with their policies. This two-witness rule, in particular, is a devastating policy, because the victim rarely has any substantiating evidence. So, and when evidence is provided that is of substantive nature, these it's because somebody else has been hurt, and so it requires people being repeatedly assaulted, repeatedly hurt. The organization, this two witness rule, protects these predators and allows them to continue to operate in society. So this is not just a Watchtower thing, but this is a community concern. This is a concern to everyone because of the nature of the Watchtower Society and their proactive policies to go into the neighborhoods and to go door to door and witness. Now, predators take this opportunity to size up whether or not a home is a prospective place where they can attack. They're predators. They're predators, and they're like predators. They think like predators. And this brought back to mind some of the things that I may have talked about in the past about the organization, in particular about Rutherford, where there's a mental disorder called psychopathy. And I picked up a book recently, an audio book. I recommend that people listen to because in order to understand the nature of such policies as shunning and the damage that shunning does emotionally and psychologically to individuals, weaponizing families, one really needs to understand the roots of the cause, which really stems back into sort of an organizational psychopathy. There are organizations that tend to promote a psychopathic culture, and certainly the Watchtower is one of those, and that largely has to do with the founders of the organization itself, and how people were promoted through the ranks of that organization. Individuals such as Charles Taze Russell, and in particular Joseph Franklin Rutherford. Rutherford, in particular, there's quite a bit about him, about his character, about his nature, that suggests, very strongly suggests, that he was a psychopath. Now, psychopathy is a very interesting personality disorder. It's a part of the spectrum of antisocial personality disorders like narcissism, antisocial personality disorder, sociopathy, and psychopathy. And many people have this conception of the serial killer, and yes, indeed, most serial killers, or in fact, I believe nearly all serial killers, qualify for being psychopathic, but that's not the stereotypical psychopath. 1%, and this actually may be a low end figure, but 1% of individuals in the United States would qualify as a psychopath. Now, there is a checklist that is called the PCLR, the Psychopathy Checklist Revised. And this is a screening tool that's used in research by those experts, by psychologists, psychiatrists who study psychopathy in such settings as prisons and other places of corporate organizations, for example. In fact, I recommend a book. If I didn't say it already, I recommend a book called Snakes in Suits. And the reason for this is um, everybody will know a psychopath. Um, that's one person out of every 100. And on a daily basis, you're likely to have crossed paths with a psychopath in one way or another. Uh, Humans, just our normal social circles, will involve, if not hundreds, at least it could be as high as thousands of individuals, depending on what kind of work we have, what kind of social organizations we belong to, and one, at least one out of every 100 individuals would qualify for being a psychopath. Now, this checklist that I referred to um, has 20 questions and 20 items, 20 characteristics. And these characteristics are rated on a score by a professional, 0 to 2. So you can get a score of 0, 1, or 2. So the highest score on this checklist is 40. And anybody who scores 30 or above is considered a psychopath. And many researchers use a cutoff line of 25. So if someone scores 25 or above, they will use that score as a cutoff line for considering an individual a psychopath. So it's interesting that there is this screening tool, which is now the state of the art standard means by which psychopathy is determined. This checklist was put together by a researcher by the name of Robert Hare, who studied psychopathy in the Canadian prison systems, where he determined that roughly 15% of the prison population qualified for psychopathy, and many of these criminals are recidivist. There is no cure for psychopathy. There is no known way to help these individuals. They just exist. They even indicated in this book that I read, Snakes in Suits, that corporate organizations, being focused on so narrowly on the profit margin, uh, make an ideal environment for psychopathic behavior, and often organizations permit psychopaths, just the corporate culture, and some companies more so than others, permit a psychopath to thrive within the organization. And there are a lot of characteristics of a psychopath that makes it possible for them to rise within an organization. And we'll talk about some of these characteristics in a few minutes. The reason I mention this at all is because I believe very strongly that the culture of the Watchtower is such that it was formed by psychopaths, especially Rutherford. He took a culture that existed and then exacerbated that culture. Um, and the Watchtower, right from the outset, one of the things that one should understand about the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society uh, that makes it somewhat different from other religious organizations is that it was established as a corporation as much as possible. Russell had this grandiose idea of at least being the head. Remember the times that Russell lived in. This was a period of what they called the Gilded Era, the Gilded Age, with individuals like Carnegie and you had the Vanderbilts and J.P. Morgan, and you had many of these captains of industry who made outrageous amounts of money. Rockefeller, Ford, all of these individuals. There's a great show on the History Channel that talks about that deals with the fathers of industry in the United States during the 19th century and into the early 20th century. And Russell, I believe, had envisioned himself as someone that um, would qualify as being one of these exceptional individuals that would be a captain of industry, but that his calling was one of God. And so he set up a corporation to promote the truth. And that's their wares. Their wares was Russell's interpretation of the Bible. And he established this system, this organization, around which the doctrines that he established would be promulgated. And Rutherford took this organization and then built upon it and built an even more ironclad culture within that organization that persists to this day. And that's why I think understanding the man helps one to understand the organization. That this is a pathological organization, that this is an organization that was established by individuals that were not mentally healthy, and therefore it is no surprise when such inhuman practices as weaponizing families and policies that where there is so great an indifference to human life and valuing human life and improving the human condition um, exists. I mean, all of these things that people talk about when they talk about the Watchtower organization, the blood policy, uh, certainly shows a complete indifference to human life. The fact that they downplay education, they don't want individuals to have uh, a better life, a life that of quality. They want them to suffer. They want them to go without, and that whatever monetary resources their followers have must go to the organization. So these individuals are barely getting by. Many Jehovah's Witnesses in a Pew uh, research study showed that they, on an economic scale, are I believe they were the lowest when they compared religions from an economic point of view. They ranked the lowest of all religions, and there must have been about 20 different religions that they evaluated. Many of them Christians. They included the Jewish religion. They looked at Hinduism. In fact, actually, if if you want to succeed economically and educationally, Hinduism promotes education and a higher quality of living from a financial point of view over all others. They rank the highest among all the different religions that were considered. And so you look at the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're taking their followers, their people, and they're squeezing the blood out of a rock, essentially, and these poor individuals suffer tremendously because once, let's say, they become enlightened to the fallacy of their teachings, they are left with very few usable skills that will allow them to succeed in life. Maybe there's a trade that might be lucrative enough, such as plumbing or uh, maybe an automobile mechanic or maybe a computer tech. But for the most part, these individuals rank lowest in terms of educational, um, academic achievement, and this is promoted by the governing body um, to very strongly to focus completely on the needs and desires of the Watchtower Society, and to put self and self-interest completely last. And then they hold out this promise that um, you'll be rewarded in the 1,000 years when everybody will sit under their own vine and fig, and they'll all eat fruit and be happy as pigs, being with absolutely no goal. Or think about it. Think about the life that the Watchtower offers as perfection. Um, there's no drive. What makes us human is our curiosity to understand the things that that are unknown to us, the secrets of the universe. Um, that's why such things as Star Trek are so intriguing to people, because it plays on that innate human characteristic of curiosity. What's around the next corner? What's beyond the next hill? Our desire to explore what is out there in this vast universe for us to discover. They quash that completely, uh, and it's almost as if we are in an opium den of with actually any lack of initiative. This is the world that they promise forever and ever and ever. I want to blow my brains out in that kind of a world. There's nothing to live for, nothing to discover, no uh, chance for exploring something new and discovery. It just eradicates everything that is human about us, and this is a directionless, rudderless organization. All they promise is a secure and safe world protected by Jehovah, and there will be no more sin, and there will be no more pain, and there will be no more sickness, and people will be happy singing hymns and praises to Jehovah all day long, eating fruit. And I can't imagine a life like that forever and ever and ever, eternally. It would I would want to blow my mind out, the kind of world that they really offer. Um, and that's because of the psychopathic nature of the organization itself. Psychopaths have no clear understanding of the future. So I think when you look at Rutherford, who established really established the culture of the Watchtower in concrete. Only individuals that fit in within that culture advanced. And so it's become a self perpetuating culture, a self perpetuating um, pathological organization through the years. And so it's a sort of a self sustaining situation. And so obviously, to me, Rutherford was the real key to the whole thing. I mean, yes, Russell, I believe, if you look closely to his personality, there was something definitely wrong with that guy. I suspect that he was psychopathic too, and he surrounded himself with individuals that would sustain the interests of the organization that he formed and perpetuate them. And that's why he put people around him like A.H. Macmillan and what's his name, Van Amberg, and all of these individuals that supported Rutherford were put in place by Russell himself. And I think Russell is when you look at him, he displayed he would probably score very highly on the psychopathic checklist. And certainly, if he is not a psychopath, he would have been narcissistic. But there are when you look at the full picture of everything that was written about Russell, you'll see things about him that certainly qualify as psychopathic. I think of one story in particular that was uh, provided in the book The Laodicean Messenger, where Russell was um, certainly he had a charisma that attracted individuals. He was a liar. Um, the court cases proved that. Uh, they he was he there were many different aspects of his personality that qualified for being psychopathic, and he was very very cruel to his wife Mariah. But there was an instance where he had been out of the country for a number of months, and a European, I guess, checking out the European branches and making a tour of Europe. This was sometime in the early 20th century. I think it was around 1910, maybe 1913. It was one of his last trips abroad because his health began to decline. And when he came back, he would do a tour of the Bethel home to make sure that everything was as he had left it. And one of the things that he checked was the food stores, the provisions for the Bethel family. And there was an individual that would be responsible for these provisions. And now this story was given to show how amazingly astute Russell was. That he was almost omniscient. That nothing got past him. That he even the most minute and banal item of information never escaped his attention, and they were making him this omniscient, almost a deity type person that knew nothing escaped his attention. And so they went down and they went into the basement and they looked at these provisions, and there was a store of potatoes. And he asked the individual who was responsible for these provisions, making sure the family was fed. He asked how much he paid for these potatoes. And, here he is, the Laodicean messenger, an emissary of God. He's one of God's messengers. He's written in the Bible. He's the man with the inkhorn. He is the wise and faithful servant. My God, I mean, you're with this special man of God, and you're given this task to watch for the provisions, and now he's questioning you about, how much did you pay for these? This is God's money. The money that we spent on supporting the Bethel family is God's money, and the poor individual said, I paid such and such for these potatoes, and Russell shot back without hesitancy, you paid too much. And so he was glorified in this book, The Laodicean Messenger, as nothing escaped his attention, that he was so astute that even while he was away abroad, he knew what the actual price of potatoes should have been. No, what he did was he made that poor fella feel like a pile of dog crap. That's what he did. And it's those types of little stories, that insights that are twisted in a wrong way, that provide insight into the true character of the individual of Russell. And so I suspect, the fact that he never really carried through on his last will and testament, that allowed and permitted the last will and testament that it was so controversial after his death. The Bible students blame Rutherford for taking advantage and usurping control of the Watchtower by not acknowledging Russell's last will and testament. Well, that last will and testament was basically null and void anyway. The last time it had been updated was at the time it was created in 1907. That was almost a decade before. That was a decade old last will and testament. It was not updated ever. And there were individuals like John Edgar who were listed to be part of the editorial committee who had died, and it wasn't a real valid last will and testament. And Rutherford, being at least a competent lawyer, knew that, and knew that any kind of a legal challenge made by anybody would not be upheld, made his move and nullified that last will and testament. And he took over the Bible students. And over time, he expelled those who were staunch Russell supporters, who worshipped the man, and formed a core around him of loyal followers that would support him and his changes. But all you have to do is read Olin Boyle's letter to understand what kind of a man Rutherford is, and you'll see that in every single characteristic he qualified for a psychopath. Now, let's people may wonder, why. a psychopath is Ted Bundy or the Green River Killer or individuals like that. Well, psychopathy, 1% of the population qualifies as a psychopath. 1%. That means there are 3.3 million psychopaths in the United States. That's 1 in 100. That means on a daily basis, you're likely to run across an individual who's psychopathic. And there's certainly individuals in your life that are psychopathic, and you may not know it. They put on a facade of normalcy, a mask of normalcy. They fake. They don't feel emotion. They can't feel love. They can't feel empathy. They're just incapable of it. It's as if a person without a right arm won't be able to be a pitcher for a Major League Baseball team because missing an arm. They just don't have these characteristics built within them. They're just devoid of this. And those that are in the know of this personality disorder believe that it's a genetic trait. It's very interesting that there have been these, I believe they're called PET scans. They're scans of the brain, and individuals are shown imagery that would evoke an emotional response. And psychopaths don't register emotion under when there are images of a very provocative nature that would evoke an emotion that should be a strong emotion that would be very disturbing to the average person, to the normal person. And so what is interesting is that the part of the brain that is stimulated when disturbing pictures are presented to them is the analytic part of the brain. I got these guys behind me. I'm sorry about the noise, but they're on the way. They're leaving. The part of the brain that is activated in the psychopath is an analytic portion, the verbal portion of the brain. They remain cool, calm, collected under fire and lie their way through. They're pathological liars. So this may be a good time to take a look at the items on the hair checklist. The characteristics there are 20 of them on this Hare checklist. Now, Robert Hare is responsible for creating this checklist, and it's the standard by which psychopathy is evaluated and screened. A glib and superficial charm. It's not real charm. But they can be quite charming. They can be disarming, very flattering to you. The over the top kind of flattery. They're very good at sizing up an individual and their utility. They have a natural instinct for determining very quickly a person's utility to them because they're very parasitic in nature. They use people. They manipulate people, and so they will use charm to put on this front to disarm an individual who may be, let's say, thinking about hiring them. You will be looking for traits that might be problematic in the future, and so they disarm you with this charm. So especially if you serve some sort of a utility to them, some sort of a purpose. Those that don't serve any utility to them will see the more of the true character of the psychopath. They won't either pay attention to you, or they are rude, or they are just dismissive of you. But they won't treat you kindly or as if you have any value as a human being. They don't look at people as human beings. They look at people as objects. Superficial charm, grandiose. They think of themselves in very high standards. They're gifted. That they're superior individuals to the rest of the human race, and most people to them are inferior. We're like flies to be squashed. Um, even those that serve utility to them, um, they what they do is they milk it as much as they can, and then they try to destroy that person. Um, they have a need for stimulation because life is very boring for them otherwise. Uh, Skydiving, uh, uh, climbing cliffs. These individuals that are thrill seekers, uh, they need some form of stimulation to keep them going. They're adrenaline junkies, pathological liars. If you really know a psychopath, they will tell different people different stories, and they don't give a damn whether or not any of these stories really jive. They figure that they can talk their way around them. They don't have they don't get nervous under fire when you question them. You catch them in a lie, they'll lie their way out of a lie. They are the individuals most likely to a pass a lie detector test, because there is no emotional response when they get caught. Um, they believe that whatever they've done, it's their right to do it. There's a justification. Um, they say that these individuals that commit heinous crimes will talk about the crime the same way as a person would talk about what they had for breakfast. There's no emotion behind it. There's no remorse or feeling of guilt for anything that they've done. Complete lack of remorse. There's shallow affect, superficial emotional responsiveness. Um, they don't know how to. If somebody, let's say a child, is on a bicycle and they they they're they are hit by a car, uh, a normal person will have some very strong emotional response. They will they If the child is very badly hurt, they will feel a strong amount of empathy to the parents of the child. They will do what they can to try and make the situation as easy for the sufferer as they can. And that's just part of our normal human nature, is to love one another, in the sense that we have empathy for other people. And they don't know how to act, so they study people, and act their way with an emotional response. So whatever emotional response that they give to a situation is acted. If they give an emotional response at all, usually they're very. It'd be like NASA staging Romeo and Juliet, which was, by the way, a Second City skit, which was so amazingly funny, uh, where Houston is directing the entire play for Romeo and Juliet, giving the responses, and the NASA is flat with no emotion whatsoever, and you got mission control saying Juliet, now say Romeo, oh Romeo, and Juliet responds by saying Romeo, oh Romeo, without any emotional sense whatsoever. They psychopaths have no understanding of emotion, and they have to act it, and it's superficial, their response. They're callous, very callous individuals, lack of empathy, parasitic lifestyle. Um, they will use their flattery to get you to do something that may be their responsibility to do, and they you get you do their job for them, and then they take all the credit for it, or they'll steal what you've done outright and take the credit for it. They're very parasitic. They won't do a lick of work if they can. They're not. They won't take the time to do uh, whatever work it is in front of them. In fact, they very rarely finish a task. That's part of the characteristics. They can't carry through a project. They're very manipulative. They will flatter and manipulate people to doing the things they want them to do. And if they're not good at manipulation, they'll outright bully you. But if they're not skilled at manipulation, they will use bullying. And even if they are skilled, it depends on your usefulness to the individual. And if you're not of any real utility to the individual, they will bully you. So bullying is a part of it. Often there's sexual promiscuity. Uh, they are individuals that lead a double life, um, and they will if they don't have a religious affiliation with superficial morals, they that's why people like Ted Haggard, it's such a surprise, because they're leading this double life, and they're saying one thing, but they're actually doing something else. And so you've got this situation where often the psychopath has numerous lovers, and many of them don't know about each other. Irresponsible. They never accept responsibility for any of their actions. If something goes awry, they always blame it on something else. Invariably, they blame it. It's that person's fault. Their ineptitude. They're not qualified. They screwed me over with their incompetence, and so this is typical. Now, when you stop and you think about there are 3.3, and some researchers believe that the percentage is actually higher, maybe up to 5% of the population would qualify for psychopathy. Uh, there, that's a fairly prevalent number of individuals who would qualify for this condition, and a person like Rutherford, who was the single dictatorial authority, formulated the culture of the Watchtower, and so anybody who was being promoted up into any kind of a hierarchical position within the organization had to qualify and meet uh, Rutherford's psychopathic values. And so that's why you see such heartless policies in the Watchtower today. And I think it's important to understand this, that the organization is not capable of reform. It just isn't. I don't believe it can be reformed. I think the only thing that really will um, is the only thing that the only real approach to something like the Watchtower is to try and put them to an end. I honestly think that an organization like that has to. There's no reform. They're not capable of reform because of the individuals. Just in the corporate world, research has shown that in the corporate setting, where psychopathy actually is a detrimental thing, even though corporate culture is conducive and can allow for a psychopath to thrive. That ultimately they are a danger to a corporate organization, one that in which the bottom line is really for the corporate good, and the corporate good benefits everybody, and the psychopath doesn't care about anybody, only themselves, and so they can single-handedly do a lot of damage to a corporate organization, and so they're not desirable and to have around, and even so. Um, the higher in the ranks of a corporation, the you're going to find a higher frequency of psychopathy in the higher levels of management in a corporate in a corporate setting. Um, Hare indicated something like you're 4 times as likely to find psychopaths in upper management in the corporate world. So, in something where profit isn't the main goal, it's the conversion of bodies and and controlling those bodies. Then I think then the culture is even more deeply anchored or entrenched within something like the society. And it was interesting in this book, Snakes in Suits. There was quite a bit of discussion in the chapters, one of the chapters, where they talk about affinity crimes, and psychopaths are drawn to religion. People like Jim Jones. There was an individual in British Columbia that rocked for Jesus. He was running a fraud scheme as a charismatic preacher, and he was fooling quite a few church organizations. He was running a real estate scam, unbeknownst to them, and he was using church treasury and funds to run this scam, and so they call these affinity crimes, and so there are certain organizations, certain settings, and religion is one of them, in which an individual is accepted readily. You got this idea of love bombing, and when the psychopath pours on the charm, what's not to love bomb? So people are surprised when 10 months later the most wonderful person in the world turns into a viper. So anyway, I think it's important to understand these characteristics because it helps to understand why Watchtower is so reticent to change. They are reluctant to change. They really are incapable of change because of the way they were established, formulated, and the culture that they promote that continues to abuse the vast majority of their membership and allows only those that fit into their corporate structure. I mean, why is it surprising that when Garrett Loesch is called to testify, for him to send a deposition, a legal response to a subpoena for deposition in the Louis Lopez case, that he has nothing to do with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society? I am not a director. I am not a member. I am not employed. I do not have anything in any way to do with the Watchtower. And everybody knew that was a lie. Everybody knew that was a lie. A bold-faced lie. And everybody's, how could he do that? Well, that's because of the psychopathic culture that is entrenched within the Watchtower society, and those that make it through the ranks into positions of decision making and power within that organization are likely those that fit these characteristics. And so I think it's important to understand these characteristics, and important to understand that there's no way to change these characteristics, that they can't be reformed, that they can't be made to see the light and become more humane, because they aren't humane, and they never will be. And this is why the Watchtower has to come to an end. It just, I mean, certain of the original sects, like the Bible students, they're on their way out just because they just through attrition, they're slowly vanishing away. But the Watchtower has a lot of money. They have a lot of resources available to them, and they have, whether or not they're very competent, I don't know, but they do have an organized legal department, and that it's going to be a much tougher deal. I think it's like Scientology, who's organized in a corporate way to ward off any external challenges to its existence using legal means. And I think Watchtower is set up in very much the same way. I mean, that watching Jeffrey Jackson lie about Watchtower policies and bringing back recommendations from the Royal Commission to the governing body, that was a bold-faced lie. And this is the culture that's established within them. Whether or not all eight of the governing body members qualify for this disorder, I doubt it. Maybe there are a couple of them, but it's the culture, it's the mindset of the organization itself that has been set and established by someone who was a psychopath. And I think that these guys that form the leadership of the Watchtower, they're trapped themselves within the if any one of them wanted to make change. Look what happened to Raymond Franz when one of them notices anything that's askew or awry that needs reform, they get there's no hesitancy to destroy a governing body member who might pose a damage to the organization, and that's what happened to Ray Franz. He found himself out before so fast it made his head spin, and that for anyone to challenge the culture of the Watchtower Society is going to feel that the brunt of that culture, the brunt of that well entrenched thinking, and it's supported. It is supported by those at the very top, and so there's no hope for reforming the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and that's why I think it's important to understand why, and that's where understanding psychopathy comes in, because there's individuals, and then there's organizational, and they're two dynamics, two aspects of human nature, and if an individual can suffer, groups of individuals can also suffer from these types of disorders, just on a larger scale. So anyway, I've gone a while, and it's a beautiful day. I want to enjoy the rest of the day. So I wish you all the best, and this is Truth Seeker saying so long.